Good day. I'm Dave.
And I'm Dave.
This is the OFFSITE
Insight.
Podcast.
Today's episode is brought to you by the Creative Co-op. If you have any advertising, design, marketing needs, please reach out to Gino and the team at tcco.ca.
My guest today is Scott Aitchison, the MP of Parry, Sound-Muskoka. How are you, Scott?
Great, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for being here. And without further mention, he is the current Shadow Minister for Housing, which I think is a pretty appropriate person to have and discuss some issues that face not only us here in Ontario, but across Canada. So thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I just want to say thanks for having me, number one, but also thanks for doing this. I think this is important. Organizations need to reach people in different ways. And I think it's great that the Simcoe County Home Builders has decided to do this. It's a great way to connect with folks and help them understand, make them aware of things and help them understand the issues that we're facing. So it's a smart move to do. And I'm honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you so much. It's been fun. I think we've enjoyed all of our guests so far, and they've, some of them even asked to come back. So that's good. That's a good sign.
So this is the test. So we'll see how it goes.
Well, let's jump in. As I mentioned, you're the Shadow Minister for Housing. So that's a big, important job. You got to critique and make sure that the Liberal government is doing what they're supposed to be doing, or things that you think they're supposed to be doing, you as in the general party.
Mm-hmm.
What specific policy changes do you think would make the biggest impact on housing affordability, both nationally, as every Canadian province I think suffers from this in some different varying ways,
Yep.
But also in your specific area in Parry, Sound, and Muskoka, because I would assume the markets are similar to Simcoe County, but there are differences, obviously.
I'll say this to start. You've helped make a great segue into the point that I think needs to be made before we talk about any general policy.
Sure.
Is that there is no single Canadian market for housing.
Right.
I think all your members certainly understand that the market is different in different parts of the country, different parts of the province, even different parts of cities, even.
Absolutely.
And so, the scale of the crisis in Canada is different depending on what part of the country you're in.
Yep.
I would observe and share with you guys and your listeners that the crisis is most acute in those regions of the country where local development charges and fees and process are the absolute most expensive and the slowest. So I'm talking the GTA and the Lower Mainland BC. And so, we observe, at the federal level that if we're going to solve this crisis, then we have to deal with the areas where it's most acute.
Mm-hmm.
And that, as I say, happens to be, the GTA and there's other regions of Ontario that it's bad as well. But the GTA and the Lower Mainland of BC are the epicenter of this. It's also where most of the homes are getting built, need to be built. And so our argument all along has been, as conservatives, that if we are going to make homes more affordable, then we need to reduce the burden and the cost of government on the cost of building a home.
Right.
And to put that into context, again, I'm sure most of your members know this, but in Ontario, on average, the price of a new home, about 30% of that is government taxes, charges, fees, process. And to help people understand that, if you're buying $1 million house, then $300,000 of that is taxes and fees. It's all government. Now, there are lots of people who say, well, the government needs that money, though. They need that money for other infrastructure programs, whatever it might be. And of course, the problem with that is that it's become so expensive that people can't afford to buy anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as a party, we've talked a lot about this issue as it relates to young people trying to get into the market, trying to buy their first house, and that's been an important, I think, part of this discussion. But what we haven't done a good enough job, I don't think, is to talk about the impacts that has on the people that already have a house. Right. We've created a system in this country based on the notion that, equity that you build up over time in your home, you can then use that money tax-free
Mm-hmm.
to help fund your retirement. But the problem we have, of course, is that if no one can afford to buy, then no one can afford to sell.
Right.
And now you don't have a market. And so this is something that affects everybody. And the biggest issue is, in fact, government. And literally, It's about government getting out of the way and making it easier.
Mhm.
It shouldn't take 6 years to get permission to build a subdivision.
Right.
And it shouldn't cost $100,000 just for a development charge for something that may happen down the road because of other growth-related projects, right?
Yeah.
Effectively, what we're doing is we are saying all new development should pay for the cost of any growth-related services, and that's not sustainable.
Right. The longstanding model in Ontario, I can speak more confidently on
Yeah.
that growth pays for growth.
Yeah.
And I think we're
Growth shall pay for growth.
Right.
Was the line.
Right. And so now we're reckoning with, 40 years of that kind of policy ideology to the point where it's very expensive to develop anywhere.
Absolutely.
Anywhere. And, one of our guests was like, it seems as though BC and Ontario are having a race as to who can be the slowest
And the most expensive.
and the most expensive. And there's different policies and different municipality regulations, from Canada to Canada. And it's like, yep, out in New Brunswick, we don't do a whole lot of that, but the houses aren't falling down. And in Vancouver, we do all of that,
Right.
and houses aren't falling down. Maybe there's somewhere in the middle that we can come to an agreement.
Absolutely. And honestly, and I speak obviously more authoritatively in Ontario as well, just because of my years as a municipal councillor and mayor and being actively involved in these files. But the system is very similar in BC. Ontario and BC have very similar planning systems. And the development charge system here in Ontario, the DCCs, as they call it in BC, the process of developing that has become this really incredibly insular system where there's literally two kind of consulting firms in the province.
Right.
And I've watched these guys as they coach municipal staff on how to add projects to the development charge, calculation and all that kind of stuff. So, and the problem we have now, of course, is that the province has tinkered with this a little bit to try to make it a little more fair.
Yeah.
And so the idea now is that you can only charge, you can only spend those development charge reserves on projects that you've charged for.
Right.
So if you don't actually do that project, the money just sits in the bank.
Right.
And yet the people trying to buy their home still paid for it. And in truth, if they can only put 5% down, that they put a lot of that taxes and fees on their mortgage.
Yeah.
So they're not just paying for it once, they're paying for it for years. Collectively, municipalities in Ontario are sitting on almost $13 billion in development charge reserve funds. $13 billion. Can you imagine how many sewer pipes and water pipes that could get built right now?
Mhm.
What I call housing enabling infrastructure.
Right.
But they can't spend it because the assumptions made in their development charge reserve background study
Right.
don't support the expenditure over here. So it just sits there. It's honestly, we are killing the home building industry so municipalities can sit on big chunks of money in their bank accounts.
Right.
That's extraordinary.
It is extraordinary. It should be criminal, but we'll get there later.
The Building and Land Development Association suggested that we need something like 1.5 million homes. I think that was a couple of years ago. That was a figure.
Yeah.
Should I recall some years prior to that, it was 1.5 million homes.
Mhm.
So we've needed 1.5 million homes for something like a decade, and they're still not being built.
Yep.
So you're saying there's $13 billion in reserve available. I mean, that's
Yeah,
it's just Ontario.
That's just Ontario. It's just Ontario.
Yeah, and it's a complicated thing, right? Because the way the legislation is written is that the municipalities, and we don't need to. I'm not an expert in planning. I've sat through a few of those, DC charge council meetings
Yeah.
before in my past.
Hours you'll never get back.
You'll never get back, and the only person that's enjoying it is the consultant who's walking
Absolutely.
through.
It is ratcheting up a
Billable hours,
having a great time. Absolutely.
And so that, I would absolutely agree. There needs to be a fundamental rethinking on how the funds that have already been collected should be opened up. So for example, we're building a community in this particular township, and they say, hey, because of this new community, we're going to need a new fire hall to support the people. Okay, that on its face, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But that fire hall doesn't actually need to be built for 15 years. So we've charged these homeowners the development charges, and inside of that development charge is an allotted amount for that future fire hall.
Yeah.
In addition to that, they're also calculating the expected cost of that fire hall when it's projected to be built.
Right.
So if it's 15 years out, they're factoring in what it's hypothetically theoretically going to cost in 15 years.
Yeah.
So that's where you arrive at this, huge headline number that municipalities by legislation are allowed to charge and plan for, but then they sit on it and wait for it to actually be built. And then who knows what changes may happen in that community in which they no longer need that fire hall.
And ultimately, it's driven by the same NIMBY factors that oppose new development. Right. Local municipal councillors, and I've served with them, so I can say this, many of them are cowards. I'll say that unequivocally. They are afraid to do what is right versus what is popular. And so the people that get a say in their decisions are the ones that already have a house. So, it might represent good planning, and, the presentation from your professional staff might be like, we recommend in favor of this because this is good planning. It's exactly what our official plan, our zoning bylaw speaks to in terms of growth. But the largest number of people in the room to speak to the issue are old white-haired people who don't like change. And so they vote against it. But this is also what happens when it comes to development charges, right? So they don't want to raise taxes on the existing property owner. So they say, growth shall pay for growth. Any new development, don't worry, present homeowner, that new growth won't cost you a nickel because we'll make sure that they pay not just for the infrastructure required for their new subdivision, but for any future infrastructure down the road that might need to be. If we might need to add another lane to the road over there, don't worry, we'll charge them ahead of time for that. Mm-hmm. And so as a result of that, the development charges get really, really high, and it gets more and more expensive and harder to build. So fewer things get built. The problem though is that unless local leaders start looking at this more holistically and start thinking a little bit about the importance of that industry, what about the home building industry? What about all the ancillary industries that go with a new home? If you take a look at just the new home business itself, strictly, that's almost 7% of Canada's GDP. Mm-hmm. If you add everything else in, furniture, renovations, real estate fees, lawyers' fees, insurance, like everything else that goes with it, it's almost 20%. The IMF, the OECD have described Canada's housing situation and the long, painful process to get permits, for example. They've described it as a macroeconomic risk. It's not just it's difficult for these young kids, but it was difficult for us too. That's right. You're allowed to right. Yeah. Well, it was tough for us too. We bought our first house. I'm like, no. Interest rates. This is a different planet. Like we're just a different game altogether right now. Yeah. These kids are never buying a house, and that's not good for you either, frankly. Yep. But you've caused it. This has happened over generations. Yep. I'm the first one to say it's not the liberals that did it. It's not the conservatives that did it. It's a generational thing. Absolutely. Yeah. I wouldn't say they did it with any malice or
No,
but it's evolved this way.
Yeah.
And we have to reset it, or it actually risks 20% of our GDP. It's a major issue. And so whenever we debated development charges in Muskoka, I was always the district councillor. So we have a 2-tier system, kind of like a lot of the places. And of course, the bigger development charge at the district level, because they're responsible for the expensive water and wastewater, things like that. And so, I would hear members of council go, we could go as high as this. The report says we could go this high. We should go to the max. And of course, in the context of Muskoka, it was always like the 3 rural townships with all the cottages and the assessment, right? Mm-hmm. They didn't want to be paying for anything. Yep. So the developer should pay for it. And in the towns, we're like, well, this growth is good for all of us, though. And so I would always argue, you might be able to go to the max. Mm-hmm. But if you're not getting any building done, then you're cutting off your nose to spite your face. You're not going to collect any revenue. Yeah. Which they were fine with because they didn't want the growth. Right. But I also argued that, having people with good paying jobs, building homes, that's good for our economy too. Mm-hmm. And so you have to balance all these things. And that's what's missing in this. Yeah. That's what's missing in this.
And I think, just circling back before we move on to another topic, because I'm sure we've got lots to discuss here.
I could talk about housing forever.
Yeah. I think on its face, when the idea of growth shall pay for growth, I get that. It makes sense to a certain extent, but also I think it's important for the existing homeowners in a community of it already established is you get the benefit of the new infrastructure as well. Oh, there's a new park in that new subdivision. Yeah. I'm going to take my kids there. Or, they're building a new hockey arena because of that new development. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I live here and I didn't pay anything for it. There's an imbalance to that as well.
I think it's fair to say that growth shall contribute to the cost of growth. But, growth, you have to look at it a little more holistically than that. We have not done that.
Yeah.
So that needs to change.
Yeah. And that's the challenging thing, because it requires 3 levels of government to row in the same direction.
Yeah, that's another important part of this. And of course, the question was what policies we do. And I haven't told you any policies. So all I've done so far is complain. But the reality is, one of the reasons why municipalities are always looking for other sources of revenue is there's a certain reality to their situation, right? I mean, municipalities are responsible for almost 70% of the infrastructure in this country, and they have 9% of the taxation tools. Today, the property tax system is paying for things it was never, ever in a million years envisioned to pay for. We created property taxes to pay for things like roads and fire trucks and that kind of thing, right? Like pretty basic services. But now the municipal tax system is paying for, social housing and all kinds of other things that was never envisioned to pay for.
Yeah.
That's happened over decades as well. While, federal and provincial governments' mandates have expanded and they've taken on new things and created new programs. And then when the economy went south, the first thing that the federal government started doing was downloading the provinces, and the provinces downloaded to the municipalities. The ending result of all this, though, is that we've got, I think, governments that have tried to do too much, too fast, and too many things. And we have massive deficits in this country. The debt is accumulating rather rapidly. And because money has been so cheap for so long, we've been able to sustain sort of this whole system of charging new homeowners, new buildings for potential, future growth-related infrastructure. But money is not so cheap anymore, right? Like, things changed on a dime, and all of a sudden, oh, wait a second, I can't afford that mortgage anymore, right? And so there's no question that the local property taxes can't afford to pay for all the things they're supposed to be paying for. So now we have a system where you have federal and provincial levels of government that contribute to infrastructure that the municipalities, if left alone, would have been able to deal with just fine, right? And so, short of like completely upending the system and pressing the reset button and starting again, which is not easy to do, what we would do if we were in government, the Conservatives, is we would tie federal infrastructure dollars, which municipalities desperately need and provinces desperately need. We would tie those kind of dollars absolutely 1,000,000% directly to results, as opposed to promises and hopes of being better.
Sure. Yeah.
Municipalities, I can give you countless examples where municipalities need resources to replace aging infrastructure, for example. Think about the water and wastewater systems across this country. They're old, they're aging, they're crumbling, a lot of them. Every municipality in Ontario, certainly, with their, capital asset management plans that they're required to have, they know where the old pipes are and what they have to replace. And so, what I've always said is that, a Conservative government would meet them where they are and say, okay, well, you need to replace that sewer pipe. By the way, another little hint: municipal politicians don't cut ribbons on sewer pipes. It's not very sexy. They like arenas. And
infrastructure isn't sexy.
It's not sexy. And so, what I've suggested is that, a federal government led by a Conservative like the Polyev would tie infrastructure dollars not just to replace that sewer pipe, but to upgrade the pipe. We'll pay to upgrade the pipe as long as the land around it is upzoned, so that you can create higher densities in your urban cores, which is better, is more sustainable financially for the municipality. It's better for the character in the community and all that kind of stuff. They get more eyes in the community, more vibrant. And you've replaced aging infrastructure that needs to be replaced at the same time, right?
Right.
And so if we can help municipalities that way, I think not only would it be amazing for industry, because you'd be investing billions of dollars in that kind of work, which is a really important investment in our economy, but you'd be saving and upgrading aging infrastructure that needs it to begin with. You'd be increasing the densities of our urban cores, which makes them more vibrant, and you'd be building a lot more homes. And the more homes you build, the more affordable all homes get.
Right.
And so these are the kind of investments that a Conservative government would make. They would be very targeted, and they would be focused not on some report that talks about how we're going to hire more planners, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to think about this. Those are the time for thinking about it, the time for hoping people will be better. That's long gone. We need results around, and that's what we would do. We would tie billions of federal dollars to real results.
Yeah. And I think you said something really interesting there that I don't think the public necessarily always understands or remembers, and that's the service level creep. I used to live in the municipality of Kitchener, but our neighboring municipality, Waterloo, they had a level of service when it comes to leaf and yard waste collection. When you think about that, like friends of mine have visited, like everyone just puts their garbage out and someone comes and picks it up. Like the idea of that is normal to us now, but 40, 50 years ago, that wasn't normal. It wasn't that we were all going to collectively pay for these large trucks to come and pick up all of our garbage and recycling and yard waste.
Yeah.
But in Kitchener-Waterloo, or in Waterloo in particular, they pay, the collective, municipality pays for a vac truck to come around and do every single street. So all you have to do is rake your leaves to the end of the street. And then the vac truck comes and picks it all up.
Yeah.
Well, that municipality also pays a lot in property tax for that service.
Sure.
And so it's this balance of, okay, that's a really nice thing to have, but is it the best use of municipal tax dollars?
Yeah. But but this is one of those areas though where it's a choice, right?
Absolutely.
And we make our choice at the ballot box. If you don't agree with that choice, then you shouldn't do it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that makes sense to me. That kind of thing makes sense to me. Like levels of service.
Sure.
That can be the community's decision. But leveling extra fees and charges on people that don't have a spot yet, that's unfair. And frankly, what we're doing is we're pushing these costs off onto future generations. That's not fair either.
I wonder, can you I'm gonna ask you something, Scott. Would you give me the strongest argument against what the Conservatives want to do, the upgrading infrastructure, rezoning area around it so that everything gets an upgrade, so on and so forth, and then take that argument down?
Sorry, I'm going to have to ask that again. Sorry, are you against my point?
I want you to argue against your point in the strongest way that you can, and then I want you to take down that strong argument.
I'm not sure I can argue against it.
I know, it does seem pretty good.
It just, I can't argue against it, frankly. And the reason why is fairly simple. A few more little tidbits for your listeners. The reality is the single family detached home in the subdivision doesn't pay enough tax to cover the services that the family in that home requires or demands, right? Mm-hmm. What we need in our urban fabric is higher densities, not skyscrapers. Not talking tall or sprawl, we're talking what we call the missing middle. This is something that it varies depending on what community you're in, right? Missing middle is a little bit different depending on the context of the community. But this is sort of gentle increase in density, particularly in our urban cores where we need people to be living. It's a better use of land, of infrastructure, of resources, and that single acre of land now generates enough tax revenue for the municipality to fund its operations effectively. Okay, we're not robbing from Peter to pay Paul, and it makes the municipality's finances fiscally sustainable in the long term, right? And so I'm not arguing against single family detached homes. I think that still should be an ambition, but we need to balance it with some healthy density in our cores as well. And that's frankly, one of the only ways that we're going to solve the municipal capital deficits. That's the other thing. Municipalities who have all this infrastructure, they're not allowed to run operational deficits on their budgets like federal and provincial governments do. But in terms of their capital needs, in terms of the repair and maintenance of everything from roads to bridges to sewer pipes, arenas, the municipalities in Canada are running gargantuan deficits. Like they don't have the money to pay for the repairs they've got to do, which is why they're constantly begging province and the feds to give them money. And so this is where you need all levels of government to be working together to say, what are we trying to achieve here? What are we trying to achieve here? We got to stop thinking about the quick wins. Oh, look, I got this money to replace that bridge over there.
Right.
That's too short-term thinking, right? We got to start thinking for the long term. How are we gonna sustain the infrastructure for the future and make sure we're not just pushing off debt to our grandchildren and great grandchildren.
Do you have examples like sort of like a comparison between what is currently the case and what you may envision for the future? For example, there's like I think it's the Austrian model where the municipality of Austria. I'm not gonna I'll talk about the principle of the approach. It's basically municipality owned an enormous amount of land, and so they developed that land in such a way that encouraged citizenship. They had limits on the heights of the buildings, but they were still relatively dense, like 5 stories and so on and so forth. And they made things walkable so that you didn't have to incur a bunch of additional costs over the dignified life and so on and so forth. Now, this is sort of a centrally planned model, so it's probably not really what we want to do in Canada. But it's something to kind of look at and compare. Do you have any sort of do you have like the city that you would, the ideal city kind of thing that you look forward?
I don't know. I can give you an ideal city, but what you've described there's nothing wrong with planning, and what I would argue that's what's missing, in particular here in Ontario. We don't do enough planning, but what we do a lot of is processing. We process applications, and we take forever to do it. We charge a fortune, and then we don't make decisions. So we hire consultants to review what we've done, and then we hire other consultants to review those consultants have done, because we're afraid to make decisions. What I've said, and this is kind of getting into the weeds a little bit, but what I say all along is that municipalities, if they actually truly plan, and they envision their community, 10, 20, 30 years out, what they should be doing is things like identifying in their community plans, their official plan, those areas of municipality where they envision medium density, high density, low density, residential, where that would fit in with, commercial, and how they see their commercial core expanding, and, community commercial and institutional and industrial lands. They would actually plan these things ahead, and then instead of just waiting for someone to come along and try to do something that everyone's opposed to, they've planned it out ahead of time. So as an example, you could say, okay, this is an area of our community where we believe high density residential should go, all in this area here. And high density in the context of this municipality is this many units per acre, whatever that is. And you're allowed to go this high. So you define that in your plan. And that's a very public process. That's what the community says, this is what we're going to look like when we grow up, right? And so when somebody comes along with an application or a proposal to do a high density building at an appropriate height on those lands, then there's no more public hearing. Right. You've had the public hearing. You've done the planning. So you're not processing applications all the time. So planning is a good thing. We just don't do enough of it. That's my point. And so what we do is we process, and every time we process something, there's a public meeting, and the people that don't like change, who tend to be retired and have all kinds of time on their hands, guess who shows up at the meeting? At the end, who wants
to oppose it.
To oppose it because they don't like change, right? So, I mean, there's no question that with good planning, we can get good results, but we don't do good planning right now. And that's the problem. There's no question that municipalities can, deliver up land for, the construction of units. They can certainly direct what they'd like to see, the kind of densities they want, walkability. They do all that stuff now, and they can do that stuff now. But when developers go into a discussion about what they'd like to build, and then of course you go through all these studies and all this process, and the municipality tells you what they want, and they finally get to a point where they say, okay, this represents good planning. We've extracted all we can out of the private developer, and they're going to have to pay all these fees and charges, and they make the numbers work, and then they go to a public meeting, and the neighborhood opposes it. We've just spent, in some cases, millions of dollars, trying to come up with something that, frankly, should have been planned a long time ago.
Yeah, that nobody wants.
And guess who wins? The lawyers and the consultants. I call this the rise of the consultant class.
Well, I mean, a perfect example of that is, the old fairgrounds in Parry, right? It has been sitting idle for now most of my life. Back when there was a fair there, that was great. And then they decided, you know what, that's not the best use of this, burgeoning city now. It's been sitting in consultancy for.
So I'm older than you, clearly. But I recall when that was shut down, there was a track there, and they wanted to have some slots or casinos. I think that was the great debate. The city of Parry said no, and so they moved south of town in Innisfil, and now that land still sits there because they have a lot of land for it.
That's right, and believe it or not, there has been applications to do various different, more high density, residential, more commercial. And all of these have been flogged down in the process that you've already spoken about.
Yeah.
The fact that it is very challenging unless it's laid out in the official plan. Even if it is, someone is still going to come and complain, and the township is going to say, okay, well, we need another report on how it's going to affect the traffic, or how it's going to affect the groundwater, or how it's going to affect the migratory birds. These are all important things, but we also need to have a common sense approach to getting big things done.
Absolutely. And I'll say this about Barry, like I'm actually a big fan of Alex Metal, the mayor, and I think that, you know, under his leadership, I think he started to make some progress in some of these files. But when I talk about this stuff, like I talk about, like, if I could snap my fingers, it'd be done tomorrow. It's not easy. It's not easy to reverse, like, literally decades of a system that has evolved to the way it has, right? And so I think they are making some great progress here in Barrie, but there's a lot more work to be done.
Well, absolutely. And I didn't mean that to sound like it was a knock on any one individual, because that's been there for 15, 20 years now.
Absolutely.
Right? So it's, multiple people.
And it's been allowed to happen.
Yeah.
And so, to sort of step in front of it and start to change that, it's going to take some time.
Yeah, and it's challenging. I mean, land use planning is a difficult thing, and I think in Ontario, in particular, where we have the Ontario Land Tribunal, makes things challenging.
Well, we done it though. This is another thing, right? Like, I've written a little bit of a brief history of our modern planning rules and systems that we've come up with, right? And it's out of control when we have 20 something different designations for where people sleep. That's out of control. That's out of control. Like, you shouldn't have to go for a rezoning, for every little thing, right? And so the province has made some moves here too, right? Permitting duplexes as of right, example. The federal government with their Housing Accelerator Fund tried to, mandate things like sixplexes everywhere as of right, which sounds good on the surface, but there are examples of municipalities that come out with actually better plans than that.
Sure.
So I'll take the example of Windsor. So the Windsor said, no, we don't like the idea of fourplexes or sixplexes everywhere in the city as of right. But here's what we propose. And so they propose this, sixplex or fourplex, whatever it was, as of right around the University of Windsor. Makes some sense. A lot of student living there, right? You get more units. Not a bad place for that. And then they propose along their, large corridors and their busier, routes through the city. They actually proposed much higher densities on those main corridors. Right? Well, that makes some sense too, right? Under their proposal that they submitted to the Housing Accelerator Fund, they would have exceeded the target that the CMHC and the federal government had set for the city of Windsor in terms of getting the number of homes built. They would have exceeded that target if they permitted fourplexes as of right everywhere. By about 25-30%. It was significant. But because they didn't ideologically meet the test of fourplexes everywhere, because that was the buzzword, they were not approved for Housing Accelerator funds. Meanwhile, the city of Toronto got $471 million in Housing Accelerator funds. One of the 6 main issues, things that they committed to do, was permitting sixplexes as of right in every part of the city. So the city council approved this, adopted this proposal and this submission. They got their $471 million award. And then when push came to shove and it was time to talk about changing the bylaws to permit sixplexes as of right in every part of the city, it's only permitted in 9 of the 25 wards.
Right.
They didn't even follow their own plan that they submitted. And the penalty from the federal government was they had to forfeit $10 million of their 471. Right. So there's no consequences there. And this is my point as a conservative, that when you give gobs of money like that to municipal governments on the promise that they'll do better, and they don't do better, as soon as the ink was dry on that agreement for the Housing Accelerator Fund for Toronto, they increased their development charges by 40%. I'm like, well, wait a second. Don't you think those development charges going up make it harder to get affordable homes built? No, they're different. There's no penalty. So that's just kind of my point, is that this is part of how our governance systems have evolved over decades too, right?
Yeah.
It's a photo op. It's, oh, look what we're doing on housing. Yeah. And then nothing changes. So I didn't argue against myself. I just, doubled down. So.
Well, I mean, I think
get the step.
Yeah. I think there's a lot it's so complex. The system is so complex. So that first time new home buyer, that young family that you're talking about, hasn't watched all of these things unfold to even have first to fix a problem. You have to understand it.
Yeah.
But the process has been that way for so long, and has, incremental differences have got it to where it is.
Yeah.
And, you're proposing changes to help move it backwards, where it allows for development to happen that makes sense, that's planned, that's, researched in a more efficient manner than it has been for the past, 15, 20 years.
When I was obviously the scale of development in Huntsville is very different than it is here in Barrie or Toronto, for example. But I was first elected to Huntsville Town Council, Muskoka Regional Council. I was 21 years old. As you can tell, that was a long time ago. But my approach, I always wanted to sit on the planning committee. I was fascinated by the stuff, and I, worked really hard to understand it really well. And I think I do actually really understand it very well. Eventually, I chaired that committee, did a lot of work around, making sure we get things going. But my approach to planning and the land development and land use rights was, I always approached it from that perspective of rights. Right.
Mm-hmm.
This concept, there was a concept in that sort of spoke to the, a man's home is his castle kind of thing. And so I always thought of this in terms of, a lot of conservatives, a lot of my colleagues will talk about this in the context of freedom, your freedom to do what you want to do. Sure. But you can put it in that context. You can think about it in the context of your rights to, to your land and what you're allowed to do. And I always approached decisions around land use planning from the perspective of, you should be allowed to do whatever you want on your own property until it starts to negatively impact your neighbors in the community, right? These are why we have limits,
right?
To protect your neighbor from legitimate problems, right? The problem is we have taken that system now and given the people who are already there more rights than the people who want to build something new. And when I would explain that to people in that kind of context, as a mayor, as a chair of planning, people who are opposed to something, they would always use the same arguments. I don't like this because there's going to be more traffic on the street. I'm like, well, it's Huntsville. Or, we're talking 6 more units on a street with 20 places. How much more traffic are you talking about earlier, right? So let's talk about a logic. Okay, well, it's not really a traffic issue. Okay, well, it's good to value my property. Like, okay, show me your appraisal certificate that tells me you understand how appraisal works and how value works. Like, what makes you think it's going to reduce the value of a property? I'm also in real estate, and I understand fully that this will actually increase the value of a property because it's a newer unit. That newer unit lifts the, rising tide can lifts all boats, and property value probably going to go up. My privacy or the view, well, you don't own the view. You don't own the view.
Yeah.
But what about my privacy? I'm like, well, okay, you want a fence? Oh, I can ask for that? Like, well, sure. This is a discussion about how neighbors work together here. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Well, that's interesting. And then we started into a discussion about, they have rights, you have rights. What if you wanted to add a deck onto the back of your house, and your neighbor didn't like it, so they took you to task at town hall? Right. How would you feel about that? Well, I should go and build a deck. I'm like, yeah, you have rights.
That's right.
Yeah. So does your neighbor. Why don't you talk to each other? The system should be about talking to each other, right? And that's gotten lost in this because the system has been used now for generations. It's gone this way where we use it to stop things from happening as opposed to permitting things to happen. And so we talk a lot about making it legal to build again.
Right. And it's so funny because from my community, I can raise lots of that. Well, I pictured being able to see a farm field when I bought this house, and I'm not very old, but I can remember, ma'am or sir, when your house was on a farm field, and I'm not very old. Yeah. So don't expect that farm field is going to be a farm field forever.
Yeah.
Now, do we want to protect agriculture as a major base in Ontario? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But also the idea that you're going to prevent something that already was allowed to happen for you is frustrating for me as a younger person in the generation, looking at that, being like, hey, but do you not see the hypocrisy there?
It is interesting, and more philosophically speaking, like, we resist change so aggressively as humans. And yes, it is probably the most consistent thing in our lives.
Absolutely.
Things are constantly changing.
Absolutely.
And so, and yet we resist it at every turn. Anyhow, bizarre.
So, okay, we'll shift gears a little bit here, and I want to, but I want to stay on the housing topic because I think that's the most important thing for us as a home builders association, for the people that are listening to this, and I think it's something that you're very passionate about. obviously with a planning background, how do you work across party lines? Obviously, you're a conservative, and there's liberals, and there's NDPs and Greens, but we want to see results from our politicians. And can you provide, how's your approach towards that? And any examples of where you found, hey, I worked with this person who I didn't agree with on X, Y, and Z, but we got this done.
Yeah. I'll say that I consider myself incredibly fortunate that my introduction to politics and my sort of maturing in politics was in a municipal system that is it's a consensus building model, right? I mean, it's designed that way. And I can tell you all kinds of knockdown, drag 'em out debates that we had in the council chambers. But I always had a policy that, we can argue and debate in here, but we're definitely going for a beer afterwards.
Absolutely.
And, at the end of the day, we got to move on. Right. And so I just always sort of had that approach, I guess. I also fundamentally believe that politics, like business and so many other things, is fundamentally its core, it's a relationship business. And so, I think the best politicians are the ones that can find common ground with others, build coalitions, build consensus around ideas. Maybe don't get everything they want, but get going in the right direction, right? It's certainly how I operated as a mayor. And frankly, it's still how I operate as a member of parliament. So, I mean, there are lots of other members of parliament that I don't agree with on things. Some of them sit in my own caucus,
Sure.
right? And so when you have 343 different individuals from different parts of the country and different experience and different generations, there's going to be a lot of difference of opinion. But fundamentally at its core, we are there to serve Canadians. And if we're always looking for ways to make Canadians' lives better, and we're honest about that process, then we can find ways to work together. And it does happen more broadly as the parties work together. I mean, you don't see it on television because that doesn't, sell ads on media. Right?
Sure, but
What the controversy and the clashes are what sell. But there are lots of examples of the parties working together. And frankly, I can give you countless examples of other members of parliament from other parties that I have great relationships with. Go for a beer with them sometimes, I just think that if you're there for those reasons, then you're going to find ways to create solutions. I'll give you one example. It's a pretty cool story actually. But after Aaron O'Toole was later at the time, after that election, we lost that election, and right after that election, Aaron O'Toole asked me to be the Conservative shadow minister critic for Labour, and the minister for Labour at the time was Seamus O'Regan. And so I had a pretty good relationship with Seamus, and he had presented a piece of legislation related to ensuring paid sick days for federally regulated industries. That's the other thing. Most industries in this country are not regulated by the federal government; they're regulated by provinces. So we're talking like airlines and banks and that kind of stuff, right? They already have pretty good packages, right?
Yeah.
And so in the previous parliament, a colleague of mine by the name of Tom Comich from Calgary, conservative, very, very conservative member of parliament, and he had presented what's called a private members bill. So it's not a priority for anybody but the member, right?
Right.
But everyone's name is drawn, and you get, you're in a number, you get a chance to put forward a private members bill. I've never done it because my number that I draw is always like 300 and something. Right? So I'm never going to
Session's close. Yeah.
So Tom Comich, though, had presented his own private members bill in the previous parliament, in honor of a little baby girl that he and his wife had lost at about 28 days. And this bill was about ensuring bereavement leave for parents who lose a child, obviously in federally regulated industries. And it was an incredibly personal thing for Tom, of course. And every member of the House of Commons in that parliament voted in favor of it. It was unanimous.
Yeah.
And but it still has to go through committees and process and all that kind of stuff, but it was unanimous. Nobody tinkered with it or anything. It was just like, this is the right thing to do. It had gone to the Senate. And of course, in our system, the Senate has to go through the same process of like first reading, second reading, committee, third reading, back to the House of Commons. By the time it got back to the House of Commons, though, I don't think it actually quite made it back to the House of Commons. The election was called. And what happens when an election is called is that everything that's going on stops and start again. It's called what's on the order paper, they call it, die. So it had just sort of gone to the wayside. And now in the new parliament, Tom's number was drawn for private members business. He was going to introduce the game, but he was 280 or something like that.
Yep.
And he just thought, I'm never going to get this done. So I had been chatting when we sat close to each other, and I just, hearing his story and telling me about it, it really impacted me. I'm like, that's a very profound thing,
And that affects, lots of different folks.
Lots of people, right? And so, I read through his bill. I read a lot of the background research, and I was really compelled by it. And so I remember, the day that Minister O'Regan presented his legislation, I was like, we weren't going to oppose it. We're like, well, it's kind of like, it's a bit virtue signaling because, banks and airlines and railroads, they already have these kind of protections in place. They have collective agreements. But I also recognize that they were trying to set an example for provinces to sort of follow suit. So they were doing this thing, and I was like, yeah, there's really not much to oppose here, right? So I went and sat down with Seamus in the House of Commons beside him in his chair. And he says, hey, what are you doing? I said, your bill's kind of, it's kind of meaningless, really. He goes, no, it's not meaningless. I'm like, well, it doesn't really have a huge impact. I said, I have an idea for you. What if you include in your bill Tom Kimich's private members bill from the previous parliament, which was unanimously accepted?
Mm-hmm.
I said, if you adopt that in lock, stock, and barrel, just add it in, make it one bill, include the bereavement leave, add his wording in. I said, we could all agree and go home for Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
Quite literally, it was almost Christmas. I said, if you can get that done, I said, you'll have universal support from the Conservatives. He was intrigued by that. He's like, oh, that's a really neat idea. Okay, let me see what I can do. So a week transpires while, the finanglings go on behind the scenes and stuff. And there were some political games that were attempted from the PMO, frankly, the Prime Minister's office and his staff. It looked like it was going to fall apart, and it looked like, it was going to be an ugly fall apart. But I think Seamus actually saved it. And so we got unanimous consent on this thing, and it was literally the day before we broke for Christmas. And so when a bill is adopted by the House, after votes or unanimously, the minister speaks to it. It's the minister's bill, and then the official opposition critic speaks to it, and then the next party. And so Seamus O'Regan stood up to say this is an incredible thing. It's a very rare thing. But before he got up, I was sitting with Tom, and I asked Tom, I said, I am supposed to speak to this, but I think you should, because it's you should do that. And he was very touched by that. He said to me, he says, what you've done here today? I said, well, I've been a small town mayor just trying to get a deal done and make some good things happen, right? Yeah. And he says, well, that's true. He said, but my staff continue to look, he said, but we're pretty confident that this is the first time in the history of this place where a private member's bill from the opposition has been included in a government bill without any change and adopted.
Yeah.
I was blown away by that. Tom was in tears because, we had done something to honor his baby girl who had died. Mm-hmm. We had done something that was a powerful thing for all Canadians. Mm-hmm. And we did it without fanfare.
Right.
And we just found a way for Conservatives and Liberals and NDP and Bloc and Elizabeth May and the Green Party to all just go, yeah, this is the right thing to do for Canadians.
Right.
And we did it. And we literally went home for Christmas the next day.
Yeah.
And it was a great thing. It's doable is what I'm saying. That was a bizarre way to get it done. But
no, I mean,
I don't know any better, right? I'm just a small town mayor. I'm just this is kind of silly. Why don't we do this?
And it's a beautiful story that I think, sometimes we don't, there's a lot of disengagement in the political process across all generations, across all ethnicities. There's a disengagement, but, it's a reminder that good things still happen. There are still good people trying to get good work done. Yeah. And, I think it's important for that story to get out. Right.
I've told it a couple of times, but it's one that I'll always cherish. We did something good that day.
Absolutely. How do you think about what's good? You mentioned the only constant is change. A bit of a philosophical tidbit.
A little bit.
So in the sort of same category, or philosophy more broadly, mm-hmm. Everybody in Parliament thinks they're doing what's good.
Yeah. Probably, mostly, yeah.
Why do you think there's so much conflict?
Well, I think there's Two things. Number one, the system is set up for conflict. It's designed for conflict. And it's one of the oldest democratic systems in the world. And it's actually pretty effective. The argument is, it's not really a theory, but the practice is this, that a government of the people, by the people, as they would say in the United States, but a government elected by the people that is responsible to them is better and sharper if they are constantly challenged on the decisions that they are making. And so in that regard, the governing party and the government itself is very important in our system, but almost as important, in fact, I would say just as important, is a really healthy opposition that challenges their assumptions, that criticizes some of their decisions, that, there are all kinds of examples in our history where governments have backed down on things that they thought were a great idea, but they weren't a great idea. Nobody knows about them. They don't ever see the light of day. That's an important element of our system of government. And I would say that it's an important element that's missing in a lot of our deliberations as a society. Conversations make better decisions. We have to talk to each other more. One of the challenges that we have, I think, in federal politics is sometimes the partisan shit can become personal, and that is where we start to fail. I'm a big believer that debate and vigorous debate, healthy debate, criticizing ideas, challenging assumptions is absolutely fundamental to our system and crucial. It's a must. But when you attack individuals for their motives or their intent, then that's not what we're there to do. And so that does go on. Don't get me wrong. And sometimes in the zeal to win an election, we'll demonize our opponents, and that happens. I'm not a big fan of it, but that's why I think it's important for people like me to continue to lead by example. This is the way I think we should do it. And I'll be honest, I think that, particularly on the housing file, I feel like we've actually started making some progress to making the system better, to making it a little easier to get things built. If you look at the agreement between the federal government and the provincial government here in Ontario on eliminating the HST and all new homes under $1 million, that didn't happen without vigorous debate from Pierre Poilievre and Scott Aitchison. We have been pushing for that for 2 years and demonstrating to people how much it adds to the cost of a home. That's progress. And I'll tell you right now, I'm convinced that would not have happened if it wasn't for the work that we've been doing. That's good progress. So it may seem unnerving and unsettling to have this constant debate in the House of Commons, but it's how we get the best decisions. So, but you asked as well, how do I do what is good? I think now that's really quite philosophical, but I think I think we all come to life with with whatever sort of moral core that we've been raised with, and I'm one of those. And I think about what's good in terms of public policy. I like to think about what's good for all Canadians. What makes their life better? What makes their experience and their life here better? How can people realize their dreams, fulfill their goals? What's the balance between how much government should do for you and how much you should be able to do for yourself, right? And these are the kind of philosophical debates and political debates that we should be having in Ottawa about, what impact or what influence government should have on our lives, and those are healthy discussions. I would argue, as a conservative, the government's gotten too big and does too many things kind of mediocre. Like it should be shrunk down and focus on key priorities and get the job done and largely get out of the people's way. Pierre has a funny line. He likes to say, if I was starting a new party, I'd say, which he's not, but he said, if I was starting a new party, I'd call it the mind your own damn business party. Like, get out of the way, leave me alone. There will always be a role for government in our society, and there will always be a need. There will always be people who need the support of the state and assistance. And frankly, if we focus our government on supporting those who absolutely need it, but otherwise getting into people's way, I think that we'll do a lot better job of supporting those who need it. So, you know, I think the government is a place where everyone comes and no one gets left behind, but it can't be all things to all people. And so that's how I think about what's good, what's better, what improves people's lives, and how do we do that better.
I think that was a good answer, if you will, in the sense that, we all have different values, backgrounds. You've talked about that, different experiences, and it's trying to get to an understanding of, hey, how do we make a decision that will change the way that we're operating now for the better?
Yeah.
And that's what, I hope that all the politicians that you serve with are aiming for. And as you said, the process to get there through the democratic process here is involving a lot of arguing, and that's okay.
Yeah. Good debate is good debate. That's how you get better decisions, I think. I agree.
It's an ancient practice.
Yeah.
I'll make an easy one as we kind of look to wrap up. We've taken up so much of your time, and Dave and I both appreciate that. But
I don't know if you guys have noticed, but I do like talks. All
right. What's your favorite place? And you're gonna have to pick one, and that maybe get some of your constituents mad, but to unwind in Muskoka.
What's my favorite place?
Yeah,
my house.
Okay.
Yeah, that's an easy one. Honestly, like I live on Lake of Bays, just outside of Baysville. It is. I've had it now for about 10 years, and it's a small little place. I'm the poorest man on Lake of Bays. I'm very clear to everybody. It's a miracle I got on the lake, but I got a little, 1,400 square foot 2-bedroom slab on grade with beautiful gardens, and it's a little oasis where it's very quiet and peaceful, and it's my place to go and retreat. And I don't get to sleep in my own bed as much as I used to, but who knows? Maybe that day will come again. So that's my favorite place to go.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, Scott. I hope wish you all the best in your next session, and we're super grateful that you took some time out of your day to come visit us and talk about really important issues, I think, for Canadians across Simcoe County, but everywhere.
Yeah. Thanks very much, guys. This has been great. I've enjoyed this. And you've had some great questions, I got to tell you. It stumped me a couple of times. It's good.
Thank you.
Well done.
Awesome. Thanks again, Scott. If you are interested in sponsoring an episode or becoming a podcast guest, please reach out to us at podcast@schba.ca. Scott, thanks again. I really appreciate it.
Thanks again, guys.